dyslexia, dysgraphia. Again, our position, our model, if you will, and it's not real. You know, I don't try to convince anybody that this is real. What I say is the model that I use for working with reading problems that are maybe associated with dyslexia or graphia, writing problems. The model that I use is we have a natural skill which knows that this is a marker, marker, marker. It doesn't matter what angle, whether I flip it upside down, right side up, okay? And for some people, oddly enough, the very intelligent, creative, outside-the-box thinkers, okay, for some reason, that doesn't, that rule is not able to be broken or overcome when they go to the symbolic world, so that these letters all look alike. And in the real world, they do. They're the same thing. I don't forget what this is or have to relearn what it is just because I turn it upside down. That would make it really hard to get along in life. So that... so that's the model we use, and it seems to be fairly effective. When we help the client establish a strategy to focus, because now here's another dimension to that focusing exercise, okay? What we're doing is we're focusing. A dot, even a big dot, is essentially a zero-dimension object. So if I'm a creative thinker and I look at a three-dimensional object, right, my brain kind of, you know, unconsciously likes to poke around. It looks at from the top, the sides, the bottom, maybe kind of an isometric angle view, right? It's just all unconscious. So the nice thing is, this is all about process. It's all about process and perspective, which gives us the tools to, in what I found in most cases, to take a kid that may or may not be diagnosed with dyslexia, but give him the skills to read, to focus on one word at a time, to see it, to memorize his sight words and build a vocabulary, and see those words one word at a time. I'm really big on kids following along with their finger when they first start out. A couple of weeks. I tell them it's not for forever, it's just for a couple of weeks. Follow along. And you just set the pace. You just set a nice steady pace, a comfortable pace. But what happens is, you know, words are all different lengths, right? They're all different lengths. So, you know, everything, in, powerful, the, okay? So if you tend to be setting a steady pace with your hand, you have pretty much the same amount of time to look at each word regardless of how long it is. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. There's a little bit of difference because, you know, okay? But it's still usually not enough of a difference to completely sound out the word. So what happens is, with a little practice, you start not sounding out all the words. You just see them, like my computer program that I'm still working on. You see the word and understand it and recognize it long before you can have time to sound it out. And now your fingers, you get used to following your fingers, so now you're on the next word, so you're not going to go back and sound that word out, right? You just keep going, and you keep the movie going, you keep the story going. Nice steady pace, and after a while, you start out in reinforcing them to take their time. See one word at a time. One word at a time. Read a sentence, visualize. Read a sentence, visualize. Read a sentence, visualize. Read a paragraph and visualize. Read a paragraph, visualize. Then start reading a little bit faster, and as they become more and more comfortable, and you'll know because they'll tell you, you know, do you have the whole story? Can they stop at the end of a page and and you take the book away and you say, okay, tell me what happened. And they'll go blah, 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 blah. Cool. All right, let's read the next page at 1.5 times speed. Crank it up. Trust yourself. Trust the pictures in your head. Trust your imagination. Let your eyes do the work. Trust your imagination. And then after a while, you see the kids, they'll start doing this. Here's the page. And they'll just go, I'll tell them, because they start doing this. It's really funny. And I'll say, okay, relax. When you get to be that fast, just kind of like, you stay towards the beginning of the line and just kind of follow it down. And they'll start reading about, a page, every 10 seconds or something like that. 6 seconds. So, 300, 400 words a minute is really doable. Visual reading. Make sense? So in most cases, dyslexia, we're going to start with building our letters out of clay, practicing visualizing simple words, and then our sight words, and then maybe some other words and vocabulary words. Reading speed is going to be dictated by two things. The process by which we can see the words and visualize the meaning, and also vocabulary. And with older kids that have been struggling with reading for a long time, vocabulary is going to be the big one. So before you make any promises, let them know we can increase comprehension and retention fairly quickly and easily in almost all cases. Speed is a variable that is somewhat uncontrollable by us because it depends on their vocabulary and how far behind they are, with respect to the grade level. Because the grade level testing is going to require a certain vocabulary reading, right? If they can't read the vocabulary, it doesn't matter if they can read, 300 words a minute. Does that make sense? Because sometimes you will get people that say, well, my kid's reading at 90 words and I need them at 120 by next month. I've made those promises and they usually backfire for that reason, for the vocabulary reason. Plus, it puts a lot of pressure on kids. So here's our, stress reduction, focus, attention, organization, reading, starting from our building that alphabet out of clay to our sight words to, to everything else, to the reading exercises. Usually spelling, sometimes handwriting, sometimes not. Vocabulary memorization, abstract information. Usually note-taking. If handwriting is a problem, note-taking and writing composition is going to be a problem. And then test preparation, test anxiety, and any of those things that come with stress. Dyscalculia, this is math. Most often, dyscalculia is caused by, one, the disconnect between reality and symbol, right? Which is why the blocks and all those, really taking time to show them, this is one block. This is what 1 is. This is what 2 is. This is what 3 is. And believe it or not, a lot of kids don't have that. It's amazing that they don't have that connection. It's just a gibberish of I don't know what. It's not connected to anything real. So bringing that reality step by step, working through those block exercises is the awesome way to begin. And like dyslexia, they're struggling. They're probably struggling they might be struggling with seeing their numbers backwards and flipping numbers. They might be struggling with reading the numbers from left to right. Here is something that made a big difference for a couple of kids when they got up into the bigger numbers. And I forgot to mention this one. This is a good one. I have them write out their numbers as like an addition problem. So we take the number and we break it down, let's say 376, which is really equal to 300 plus 70 plus 6. Now I had a gal, I forget what grade she was in, little Jordan, one of the Jordans, and she was getting into this kind of math and having to, multiply this by a number. Let's say 7, okay? So just 3 digits times 1. So I showed her, we create a little chart here. Ready? Watch this. So we have 300 times 7, 70 times 7, and 6 times 7. Because 376 is really 300 plus 70 plus 6. 376. So I know 100 is 2 zeros because this is 3 times 100, right? So I can put my 100 down here, and then I have 3 times 7 is 21. And then I put down this 7 times 10, I put my 10 down here, and 7 times 7 is 49. Does that make sense? I have 49 tens. And then 6 times 7 is 42. Now, let's just put them down here and add them up. I have 2100 and 490 and 42, and there we go, 2, 13, 6. Does that make sense? So we take something that looks really scary and we break it down into little pieces. Fractions.
Actually, that's the way I did it for a long time. I figured that out myself.
Ah, cool. Fractions. Fractions. I do a lot of work with pizza when I'm explaining fractions. And I show them, one, that any number divided by itself, or the number of pieces that is the size of the piece of the denominator, always equals 1. So 4/4, 8/8, 12/12, 3/3, it always equals 1. And the number on top is the numerator. It tells you the number of pieces. And the number on the bottom tells you the size of the piece. The number of pieces and the size of the pieces, as well as the number of pieces in a whole. Right? The number of pieces, there's 4/4 in a whole, 5/5, 10/10. So without going into too much detail on fractions, when you're adding and subtracting fractions, they need to understand that the size of the piece needs to be the same. You can't trade halves and quarters. You can't add a quarter to a half. What's the answer? Quarter halves? Does that make sense? You have to have the same size piece. Okay. So I don't think I'm going to spend too much time on that. If you get somebody who really needs work in fractions, give me a call. But mostly, usually in math, it's because there's something missing from the past that they don't get, and something was explained too conceptual. It's just too airy-fairy. They don't get it. And then the older kids, what they're missing is the why. Okay? But back to dyscalculia, they need the focus, they need attention, they need to be reading the numbers from left to right. Hundreds, tens, and ones. So this is 10 times this. And this is 10 times this. So if I take one of these over to here, it becomes a 10. If I take one of these over here, it becomes a 10. And then we talked about time and money. Again, the principle behind it is taking something that's complex and breaking it down into basic skills. And if they understand the components, then we can put those components together and make it a little more complicated. Sensory integration, auditory processing disorder, and other sensory-based learning challenges. Boy, these, I get learning profiles that say sensory integration disorder, or now it's going to be sensory processing disorder and auditory processing disorder. They are all over the place. It is really hard to predict what struggles they're going to have. It may be reading, in math, they may be doing fine in everything. I've actually had kids, and it's funny, those are sometimes the toughest to work with. Academically, they're doing fine, but they're just whacked out by this whole thing called school and trying to stay on task and trying to stay on focus, and their frustration is building up. That's a tough one, because usually they don't want to. They're like adults at that point. They don't want to feel like something's wrong with them. So we sometimes make the excuse that, well, they're just coming here to help with their learning. We just want to make learning easier and get the teachers off their back or whatever it is. But sometimes they're just plain here for behavior and stress and anxiety or something like that. So, you might see any or all of these. Again, I left off this reading and the reading and the math, but you may see some of the advanced skills early on, like telling time and counting money, obviously stress, focus, attention. Often critical thinking and inductive reasoning can be a struggle with these guys. When they start getting into autism and Asperger's syndrome, you're going to see more of the, on page 23, you're going to see more, basically you can see everything. You may see just about everything with autism. You may not see some of the learning skills a problem like reading or math, but much more emphasis will need to be paid to the more complex skills, whether it's reading or math, critical thinking skills, inductive and deductive reasoning skills, things like goal setting, getting into the habit of seeing their future, making their future, creating their future as distinct from the present. Practicing that is going to be awesome for them. Rhythm and routine is huge for these guys. Huge, 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 huge. It's amazing how they respond. And not that you're ever going to work with a severe, moderate to severe autistic kids, because they have special services that it's pretty much all for free, okay? But if you do wind up with a rich client who is really not happy with their services, basically what you want to do is sit down with the client, see where Kathy is related with respect to me. I'm off at a 45-degree angle to her, and she's at a 45-degree angle with me. Okay, I would take up this position about this distance and go do something. And it would be mirroring what the child is doing. And I want to be matching their breathing. This takes practice to match the breathing from this far away, but but I would start matching her breathing, her posture, and I would do that for as much as an hour or 2 hours a day. And that's all you're going to do with an autistic kid for the first weeks, maybe even months. So unless somebody really has a lot of money and they really committed to helping their kid get to the next level, you're probably not going to find a lot of people that are willing to have that kind of patience.
So
Can you create amazing results? Yes, I think you can. But
so what is it that you're doing? Getting them to trust you, mirroring them back? Are they feeling like starting to get in rapport with them after a...
yes, so you're getting in rapport, you're matching and mirroring. At some point you'll make small changes in your breathing and see if they follow you. You may, like if every time they pick up a toy, you pick up a toy. Every time they put a toy down, you put a toy down. Okay? And then all of a sudden, without waiting for them, you pick up a toy, and if they pick up a toy following you, now you know you're in rapport. So first you pace, right? You match, then you test, and then you lead. So then you can lead them to speaking, you can lead them into behaviors. It's really amazing what you can do. But like I said, the chances of actually having someone to work with serious, significant autism. So let's see, what do we have? Okay, operations, that's for tomorrow. So, look at this again. Man, I'm doing awesome. 45 minutes to spare today. Any questions before I actually...
What about the early childhood program that you have?
Early childhood program. Okay. Basically, gosh, I'm gonna have... I don't get a lot of call for it. I find I don't get a lot of call for it. I'd actually have to kind of review it myself to go over that with you. It's usually for kids about 2 to 5.
That's
About...
the age I work with, so...
Okay, so at that age, about 50 to 60% of the work I do is with the mom.
Right.
I coach them to coach the kids. So most of my work with the kids is observation, and then creating what I think is the appropriate program. I watch them and the mom do the exercises together here, make sure everything's good, there's no frustration, they're not above their ability or whatever, so everything's nice and clean. And then checking in, make sure that there's no frustration, no resistance building up. You usually want to deal with those as quickly as you can, one way or another. But it will often involve the simple things like really simple midline exercises. It may involve, let's see, if they're a little bit older, in that, you know, up near the 5 or 6 years old, we probably will start working on letters using clay.
So you probably do activities kind of like stuff that I would do as a developmental therapist.
Probably. Yeah, there's probably not a lot of difference. I mean, for one thing, you're not going to see the problems that you can predict them kind of, and I hate to do that because I don't want to feel like I'm being the harbinger of gloom. You know, oh, your kid, you know, you've got 2 people in the family with ADD, 1 with autism, and your kid didn't speak till 3.
I've worked with kids and then they come back and ask me questions later when they're in school, so. And I've seen it, but I never said anything.
Yeah. You know, the biggest conclusion I draw is that he's a visual learner. And so I start with cross crawls, I start with maybe some little few minutes of eye exercises. Let's see. Gosh, what else do I do with them? Oh, fine motor skills. Usually, if they're old enough, that's finger knitting. We teach them to finger knit with yarn. We should do that before we go. Teach you guys how to finger knit if you don't know.
Thank you.
What's that for? For who?
It's just for keeping the fingers busy. Fine motor skills.
Never done that.
For little kids?
Yeah. Well, I mean, really, up till 6, 7, 8. You know, it's tough selling the boys. The girls will go for it.
For the stay focused?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And like I said, develops those fine motor skills.
Wake Sissy up. Wake her.
Yeah, I'll have to look. That's all I can think of right now. But I also want to do. I want to do a reality check with the parents, because are they just pressuring them into some performance level that they're not ready? Good. Anything else?
And from my other books, I have this one. Have you seen these two?
Oh, okay. Very cool.